You want to know what the voice in Australia might pan out like? Well, as I said, have a look at New Zealand. Recent detailed legal analysis undertaken by the Institute of Public Affairs offers a stark warning. Now, in New Zealand, their body, which was intended to have a purely non-binding advisory function in respect to redressing grievances from Maori people, it's called the Waitangi Tribunal, is similar in many ways to the proposed voice of the Parliament. Well, it's morphed into a binding quasi-judicial body, overstepping its intended purpose. Joining me now to discuss this exclusively here on Credlin, report will be out tomorrow, Deputy Executive Director of the Institute of Public Affairs, Daniel Wild. Daniel, this is your IPA research written by our legal research fellow, John Story. What can you tell us?
Well, Peter, exactly as you identified, the similar body in New Zealand, the Waitangi Tribunal, very quickly morphed from an advisory function to being embedded in the very centre of policy making across almost every single major decision coming out of the New Zealand Parliament as a result of a series of activist judicial decisions coming out of New Zealand. Now, as you know better than most, Peter, our own High Court here has a history of expansive interpretations of law, and my concern is that the voice to Parliament here in Australia will end up exactly like the Waitangi Tribunal. And indeed, our own Prime Minister has given the green light for that to happen when he said only a few months ago that it would need to be a very brave government that went against the advice of the voice.
So it's the Parliament setting the parameters of the Waitangi Tribunal, but then the court's expanding it to the point, I'm aware of a case in New Zealand where it's now into water rights and other things long beyond its original remit.
Well, that's right. And the general problem is that the effect of the Waitangi Tribunal has been to put race at the centre of decisions being made by governments. Just let me briefly give you one example, which is the rollout of the COVID vaccine in New Zealand. The government originally wanted it to be prioritised based on age, so the elderly would get first access, which makes sense given their vulnerability to COVID. The Waitangi Tribunal said, well, Maoris are typically younger than the population at large, so therefore that policy was discriminating against the Maoris, and so the New Zealand government changed its preference system not based on need, but instead based on race. And that's the problem here with the voice to Parliament. It risks, again, putting race at the centre of how our critical social and economic resources are allocated, rather than based on need or rather than being based on merit.
What other concerns have you picked up, similarities between what is proposed in Australia and what we're seeing play out in New Zealand?
Well, one of the other key similarities is, yes, it's true that there are differences in our Indigenous populations and their history, but in terms of the court system, we have a very similar system, legal system with New Zealand, and what we've seen is this ongoing creep, this mission creep of the Maori body, and we've seen this expand into, as you say, natural resources projects, and there's already a significant precedent of that in Australia's court system, whether it's major coal or gas or oil projects or other infrastructure projects where matters relating to the Indigenous population need to be taken into account. And this is only going to become more prevalent here in Australia. And the other key point that I would make is the Waitangi Tribunal has been incredibly divisive. And we know that with the voice to Parliament being solely comprised of Australians based on one race, risks permanently dividing Australians by race by giving one subset of our community essentially two votes, one for the federal Parliament and one for the voice to Parliament based on their race, and that will be incredibly divisive.
Daniel, we're just about out of time, but just quickly, I mean, were you surprised about this misinformation campaign coming your way with taxpayer millions on the Australian voice?
Unfortunately, I'm not surprised, and it's hugely concerning that the government is putting millions of dollars into educating Australians about so-called misinformation. Don't forget, this comes on top of the financial free kick that the government has given to the no case, to the yes case rather, by tax deductibility status, and the millions of dollars going in by corporate Australia, and the censorship we're seeing by big tech of the no case.
We'll watch it closely. I know the IPA is all over this, and you will be into next year, Daniel Wild. Thank you.